Everybody, welcome in, trickle in. It is a beautiful Wednesday. It's, still the morning on the East Coast in the US. It's the evening over in Eastern Europe where Bogdan is, but we've got a really awesome webinar planned for you today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we dive in. Just want to let you know that we are recording. And so when this is over, if you're registered, I'm going to shoot over an email with the replay, as well as a couple of freebies that you can get access to. If you have any questions, the AWR team is happy to help, so you can always reach them and help at advancedwebranking.com. First off, before we dive in, Mike, Bogdan, why don't you guys tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'm going to shut the heck up and get out of here, and the rest of you enjoy this awesome webinar, year 2, how the pandemic continues to impact search demand recovery.
Bogdan, why don't you kick it off?
Oh, okay. Thanks a lot, Mike. I'm Bogdan Muntean. That's my full name. I'm a customer support specialist at Advanced Web Ranking. I've been doing that for the last 4 years. Before that, I worked as a public relations specialist for a local cultural institution, and I also did international relations and technical translation. Before that, I worked in sales. However, AWR is basically my most, my most fulfilling work, because the SEO industry is actually always evolving. It always keeps you hot on your toes, learning new stuff whenever something new comes in, and adapting to it. And you can never get bored in it. So I'm very happy to split search volumes with you and go see the causes behind them. Behind their evolution and what can happen in the near future. Mike?
Cool. Yeah, I am Mike King, and you should follow me on at iPullRank. I'm the founder of iPullRank. We're an agency based here in New York City. We do, search, content strategy, some machine learning projects. You can learn more about it at iPullRank.com. But I also make music, so feel free to download my record if you'd like. It's free. In any event, I'm here to talk to you about the year 2 pandemic trends and keywords. And so, this kind of goes back to something that I started with the AWR team last year. And the key thing to know is that people often forget that people search to fulfill some sort of need. And so a lot of people's searches are the result of the impact of environmental factors, right? So we're usually stuck in this abstraction of okay, here's a keyword and X number of searches are happening on it, but they are a result of something that's happening in the world. And so environmental factors, for anyone that doesn't know, that could be things that happen in the law, that can be things that happen in politics, that can be things that happen in society, economics, technology, and then also the environment. So as we all know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, which technically falls into a lot of these buckets that we're talking about, which ultimately then impact how people actually search for things. And so another component of this is that the supply chain has been dramatically disrupted since the beginning of COVID-19. So, production delays, inability to get semiconductor chips out that are impacting things like the availability of automobiles and so on and so forth. And we saw in 2021 that actually all got worse. So, there were instances of there being increased demand for certain things. So people looking to buy more cars, but there's less cars available. And, this kind of reverberates across, all things from a product and service perspective. So again, that ultimately impacts how people are searching. And so last year when I wrote this blog post for the AWR team, it was all about how do we contextualize these changes in search demand with these changes in these environmental factors and the macroeconomics. And so a lot of what we talked about was, how does the supply chain impact things? How does the fact that people can't travel through air travel and things of that nature impact what they do as far as how they do their holidays or vacations, as we call them in the States? And so, in 2021, we've seen dramatic shifts in these verticals as far as what that search demand looks like. So we're seeing that, arts and entertainment is up significantly. We're seeing that automotive is, of course, up significantly. Business, health and fitness, home and garden, whatever non-standard content is, personal finance, shopping, sports. But the real headline here is that travel was up significantly because more and more people were able to travel last year than they were in the prior year. And so just for comparison, we saw most of those buckets down significantly. Travel was still up year over year in 2020 from an organic search perspective, but it was really real estate that was on fire last year, or excuse me, 2020, where people were angling to buy houses because they were trying to get out of cities like New York City, because it just didn't really align with what they wanted their lives to be like now that you couldn't really go anywhere. People wanted to have a far more comfortable experience at home than they did by living in cities on top of each other. And so some of the factors that impacted, what was going on in 2020 was, of course, everything that we discussed about supply chain, but also March 11th, 2020, that's when the World Health Organization officially declared that COVID-19 was a pandemic. And so that directly impacts what you saw happening with travel because, people just didn't want to be in a small metal tube flying through the air with a whole bunch of people that could potentially be sick. But what we're seeing in 2021, as far as those subcategories of travel, hotels were up significantly, air travel up significantly. For whatever reason, less people wanted to go to France, but more people wanted to go to the UK. Some of these other places like Australia and New Zealand, we're seeing more and more people that wanted to go to theme parks, wanted to do international travel, go to Africa, Europe. Also, the national parks, more and more people wanting to go to bed and breakfasts rather than hotels because they have that privacy. And then also a lot of people wanting to go to Italy. And so as we go through these trends even further, you see that there's a pretty significant spike in camping activity. So again, this makes sense because people aren't necessarily as comfortable with traveling on planes as much as they were before. And so they're looking for trips that they can take easily, via car, the cars that they're buying, considering that the demand for cars is so high. But again, if we start to look at some of these other countries, there was still a lot of activity around that, just not as much activity as was around, people doing things that they could just do via car. So if you look at some of these other places like Japan and China, Canada, the Caribbean, Greece, and also honeymoons and getaways, there's a lot less of search demand around that because of the fact that, first of all, China is where it's believed that this virus originated, and so far less people are like they want to go there. Places like Canada weren't allowing people in. Places like the Caribbean also, in some cases, were not allowing people in. But it's actually surprising to see Greece have a bit of a drop because of the fact that, just in my own feed, I saw so many people going to like Santorini in the last year. But nevertheless, there's far less people who went on honeymoons and so on. I myself also included in that group because I got married last year. But if we dig into this in more detail, just as like a, this bigger picture trend, again, if you look at the 2020 trend, people going into 2020 understood that there was something going on. But once March rolled around and it was officially declared, that dramatic drop off in, travel activity. But then, as you saw, we got to the summer, there's a lot of people that had pandemic fatigue and started to go travel a bit more. And again, as we know, there was, a spike in COVID activity immediately following this. So then people kind of ramped back down, but then ramped back up as the holiday season happened. And so also around that time, towards the end of the year, we started to hear that the vaccine would be rolling out. And then so more and more people started to feel comfortable traveling. But then as we get into 2021, again, we're at this drop here. But then once the summer rolls around, a lot more people are vaccinated. They're like, cool, let's go for it. And then again, the holiday season comes around. People, hit the flying skies. And then as the year ended, things kind of tapered off. But if we look at this year over year, it's just a dramatic improvement for the travel space. If you worked for a travel client, you just saw things roaring back Of course. And another kind of trend to highlight here is that a lot of companies just kind of pulled back in what they were doing around advertising and things of that nature. And so you're seeing as companies got back into it, things obviously significantly ramped up. So
Yeah, that's pretty much what happened on our end as well, because we got many people working in the, especially in air travel and hotel business, travel agencies, pretty much from anywhere around the world. So when the first wave of the pandemic hit, which coincides with the downward spike in March in
mhm.
2020, we also had some cases where we had to temporarily pause some accounts on client request or temporarily downgrade other accounts. But after roughly the first wave of the pandemic started dimming down, right, and restrictions also eased towards the summer, things started going back up. People were returning and people were upgrading. And cool thing, you talked about the upward spike in the middle of 2020, especially after more people got vaccinated and other restrictions were dropped. There are even talks about upgrading, such subscriptions to accommodate a lot more investment in online visibility, and of course tracking it, which is what AWR deals with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people or a lot of businesses that pulled back recognize that that was not a good idea. And there was already a lot of information on this. In fact, I think I included it in the blog post that we discussed last year that
Yeah,
when there is some sort of like economic depression or recession or what have you, the companies that keep going and keep their foot on the pedal during that end up outperforming their competitors when things go back because brand awareness, also,
exactly.
just a variety of different things that just keep you top of mind while everyone else turn things off. And I
Yeah,
think these,
exactly. So when
just
they were
like,
out of the swamp, they just saw the fuel and they made the run for it. And it's important to be ahead of your competition there.
right, right. And so I think what we've seen, especially throughout 2021, is like everyone was like, cool, we've got to make up for lost time, like you're saying. And then the people that were already ahead, they're like, cool, let's keep spending so we stay ahead. So there's just a lot of activity from a marketing perspective. But just to further contextualize this, February 2nd of 2021, there was a requirement for people to have a COVID-19 tests prior to getting on flights for all passengers that are 2 or older, and anyone coming from a foreign country to the United States. So that also kind of contributed to more and more people being more comfortable flying because they felt like, oh, all the people on this flight are COVID free. And then also around April 2nd, 2021, that's when the CDC said it's okay for people to fly if they're fully vaccinated. I myself went to Costa Rica shortly after this because I couldn't stand being in the house, uh, much longer. And so, again, if we go back to, what more and more people were doing because they needed to get out the house, they needed to get some sort of getaway, even though they couldn't go on any sort of vacation, there was a big spike in people that were looking for camping related information. And so, of course, that was through the summer that we saw this. And of course, that's going to taper off because, ultimately at the end of the day, nobody wants to camp in the
The winter.
winter. So, yeah. So, the interesting fact here is that 10.1 million households camped for the first time. I mean, I wasn't included in that because camping is ridiculous to me. Like, why would I go sleep outside where I can sleep in this penthouse? Um, in any event, like we also saw that campers were more diverse than ever. So 60% of first-time campers were non-white groups, which is remarkable in and of itself. But that trend actually got even bigger in 2021. So again, similar trend to what we saw in 2020, but more of a spike in the July region than the previous year. So, more people were interested in it. We're seeing it up significantly. And then if we look at kind of like the macroeconomic trend, well, it was only 11% of trips that people went on previously. In 2021, it accounted for 16% of trips. So if we just start to dig into some of these, keyword specific trends within the travel space, we're seeing that, towards the end of the year, of course, as you might imagine, when it gets cold, there's far more people that were interested in skiing resorts. And I suspect if we compare this year over year, there may be a difference in this, but the trend will probably stay the same in that, in the cold seasons, that's when people look for it. What's interesting to me, though, is that so many people still care about cruises. That seems like the worst thing you could do if in the middle of a pandemic, but nevertheless, there continued to be, a significant amount of activity around people looking for cruises in both the summer and the winter. But of course, if you look at 2020, there's a huge drop off once the pandemic happened because people recognize that a cruise is probably not the best place to be. And also there was a lot of things that happened in the news wherein, for instance, there was a California cruise ship where pretty much everybody tested positive. Well, not everybody, but 46 people, and there's 3,500 people on the boat. And so they were actually stranded offshore for a number of weeks, I believe, as a result of this. So the Disney World trend holds strong. I think this is actually kind of indicative of what this looks like, year over year, in that a lot of people end up going to Disney World on spring break, also over the summer, or around the holidays. So I don't think that this is a function of, the pandemic itself, but, we do know that Disney World was closed for a number of months at the height of the pandemic. However, if we look at the trends for trips to Europe, this is a bit interesting, especially because, there was the EU, the European Parliament ultimately ended up approving a COVID certificate that allowed people to travel and so on. And so we saw that the trend ramped up again through the summer and then through the end of the year, which again I believe is a bit typical for people, especially from the U.S. looking to go to Europe. So when you look at air travel 2020, of course, this follows the pandemic directly. Right after it was announced, air travel went down. And then there was a bunch of travel restrictions that happened. Of course, Agent Orange, aka Trump, he issued a series of these restrictions, starting with Iran and then the European nations shortly thereafter, which created a lot of issues with people getting home from both sides. And then in 2021, of course, we saw, just kind of this gradual growth in air travel, which pretty much spiked around the holiday season. And so as I mentioned, July 1st, 2021, that's when they rolled out the EU digital COVID certificate, which just made it easier for people to travel. And then in the US, we had in November 8th of 2021, we had that the CDC required non-immigrant, non-citizens to be fully vaccinated, which then just kind of unlocked the ability for people to travel here again. And so again, that inflection point in both years being in March, the March-April area, that's when we see things, go up. But year over year is just a dramatic improvement in the search volume around air travel. So if we look at some specific trends, in this case, people looking to go from Miami to Houston, although I don't necessarily know why they would go there because Miami is better. But nevertheless, we saw, a bit of a spike around May of last year and then through the holiday season as well. So then when we jump into style and fashion, there's some specific things that have happened specifically in the US, or most relevant to the US towards the end of last year. So, the style and fashion trend is up year over year. But nevertheless, we're seeing that towards the end of the year, there's the rollout of the House of Gucci movie. There's also Black Friday, which is when everyone is shopping, of course. And then the death of Virgil Abloh, who is a key influencer and the designer for Louis Vuitton, also a friend of Kanye West. So there's a bit of a spike in, demand around that time as well. So if we dig into this in more detail, we see that the trend for clothing is trending downward, beauty is trending upward, accessories, fashion also trending upward, jewelry downward, and body art upward as well. So we look at some key keywords here. Sunglasses, this trend, of course, makes sense because, again, we're talking about a lot of people going on vacation, starting with spring break, leading into the holiday season. And then it gets darker early towards the end of the year. So there's no reason to buy sunglasses around that time. If you look at the trend for bracelets for women, this one also makes standard sense as well because, you've got Valentine's Day in February. So there's a bit of a bump there. You've got Mother's Day in May, so there's a bit of a bump there. And then you've got, kind of a flat trend here, and then we're trending up through the holiday season. So black dress, that one suggests an alignment with, people going out. So again, you're seeing, something happening as we get through spring break and through Mother's Day, and then gradual growth in the summer, and then through the holiday season when there's a lot of parties that would probably need a black dress. So just a quick thing to highlight here: U.S. shoppers spent more in October 2021, even though the price of goods jumped at a faster pace. So again, this is a function of some of the issues with the supply chain, also the issues with respect to inflation. So you're seeing more demand than in previous times, but we're also seeing more and more people spend more money as a function of what's available. So again, if you look at this trend, you see for the subcategory of fashion towards the end of the year, things spiking. And so if we look at this trend here, or the factors here, we're seeing that retail sales during the November to December holiday season grew 14% over 2020. So, almost $1 trillion that we're talking about here. And again, it's a function of a variety of things, but part of which is inflation. So as far as the fashion trend, we always see a spike around the time that Fashion Week happens, and again, a spike around Black Friday. But I'm not entirely sure where this spike came from between April and May. However, it looks like there was, Trump talking about reopening the economy in time for Easter. Oh, yeah, in 2020. Yeah, I remember that being one of the key factors in the news. So that's probably where that spike came from. So if we look at things year over year, things were actually down a bit from 2020 around this time. And that may also be a function of people, sitting at home, buying a bunch of comfortable clothes when the pandemic first happened. But again, we're seeing things kind of roar back to life year over year around the holiday season. All right, now when we jump into personal finance, so we see that this is trending upwards. A lot of activity happened in personal finance last year. A lot having to do with what's going on with stocks, with crypto, and so on. And of course, a lot of people spend a lot of time putting money into Bitcoin and a variety of different cryptocurrencies, starting around February of 2021. And then NFTs kind of exploded into the scene. Honestly, I still don't see the value entirely. Like, I see the value because other people see the value, but I don't see the inherent value of NFTs. Those exploded on the scene in Jan of 2021 into February. And then in February, we saw the GameStop stock and the birth of meme stocks had a bit of an explosion as well. So, GameStop exploding onto the scene, crashing, and just retail investing becoming a much bigger thing. A lot of the Redditors really encouraging these types of stocks. And so you saw apps like Robinhood, really blow up over the time as well. So more and more people feeling comfortable with investing just because it's so easy. And then within Google, we saw a series of algorithmic shifts as well, in the July range, and also just an increase in what that search threshold looked like. So if we look at the subcategories, we're seeing insurance trending up, financial news trending up, credit and loans actually trending downward, despite the fact that interest rates were incredibly low and more people were going after loans last year. But we're seeing that investing trending upwards, stocks, of course, trending upwards, retirement planning, mutual funds, tax planning, and then also options. So again, a lot more people investing, a lot more people trying to figure out, how do they have long-term success within markets and so on, and also how do they just maintain safety over time. So if we look at the 2020 trend, that was also trending upwards, but there was a spike around November, around the time that the Pfizer vaccine was announced as being 90% effective. So more and more people feel more confident about investing in the market. So as a result, the stock futures surged. And then we finally got a real president in the United States, although he's not doing the best job either. But still, there was just a lot of uncertainty around the election because it was unclear as to, who was going to be the president based on how things are being counted and so on and so forth. And so with there being no clear winner at first, the market was kind of rocky until that was sorted out. So if we look at that year over year trend, we're seeing that just, year over year, there's just a lot more activity around the personal finance. And so based on those trends, we're just seeing more interest in stocks, market news, options trading, and retiring planning, because people are just feeling more confident about the market and they're understanding what opportunities a recession type thing brings to them. And then there's also these opportunities that are new and that people just have more access to playing the markets than they had previously. So stocks, of course, peaked in the beginning of the year, but then kind of tapered off. Nevertheless, there's just still more activity in the market than before. And we're seeing that these spikes are just really the result of what's happening with COVID and the political news. The interest in the retail investing in crypto and NFTs just went up dramatically. Investment in general, again, at the beginning of the year had a bit of a spike, then tapered off, but still remained quite high. NFTs, of course, blew up in the beginning of the year, tapered off, and then blew up again at the end of the year as more and more influencers got involved. You started to see more people like Gary Vee tweeting about NFTs and starting their own things. And so you just saw far more activity around it. And then for crypto in general, we saw this pretty much aligns with, the growth and decline of popular crypto like Bitcoin and so on. So of course you're going to see more people searching for it when they hear like, oh, things are blowing up. Dogecoin also being another key, cryptocurrency that people were talking about heavily around that time. And so you're seeing just more of these apps like Robinhood, Webull, and also Fidelity and Schwab, really just making things far more accessible for people, leaning into the opportunity that is retail investors. So more and more people investing means more and more opportunities for these companies to maximize, this wider audience. And so they just felt more compelled to put more content out there on the subjects, make their applications similarly accessible as Robinhood and Webull are. And so you just saw a lot more of these entrenched financial services companies jumping into these activities as well. And then, Robinhood just fielded a whole lot of controversy as there's just a lot of activity happening with the GameStop, AMC, and BlackBerry stocks, just completely cutting off access to these stocks for a number of days. So really just removing the agency of these retail investors to use their power to impact the markets in the way that they, could just use that power of the crowd in ways that they couldn't before. And so there was just a lot of, lack of reputable sources for information. Like at the end of the day, can you really trust Reddit for financial advice? And there's a lot of scams that popped up, and especially with crypto. And so there's just a lot happening that, yielded a lot more search activity because people wanted to be able to kind of discern the truth from what wasn't true. And so you saw some activity around a keyword like a sovereign bond, especially in the beginning of the year. And so people saw how volatile things were, and they were trying to find other ways that were just like lower risk for them to put their investments. And the search activity around loans, is actually quite surprising because we work with a variety of different financial services companies, and particularly in the home lending space, it was just a ton of activity, both in 2020 and 2021. So just to see that the trends had a bit of a dip in the beginning of the year and then kind of ramp back up, especially with so much home buying activity, you would expect that this trend would have stayed a bit higher. On the savings side, a lot of activity around this. I guess a lot of people looking to open savings accounts after they got their winnings from GameStop and also whatever they were doing in crypto. But it's really hard to say with this trend, like what this was definitively. Why did we see such up and down activity in savings? Now, if we get into shopping, again, this is definitely an area where things are impacted by the supply chain. But what we saw in 2020 was a lot of people just came online and were more likely to engage in e-commerce than they were in previous years. And so these trends that you're seeing here, are more reflective of what you would see year over year, where there is a spike towards the end of the year as a result of Black Friday, but things pretty much remain the same with respect to throughout the year. The trend wasn't like dramatically shifted aside from what you saw in the summer. And that may just be a function of people, just needing things for cookouts and things like that, especially as you see this happening right before the 4th of July. So there was also a bit of a shift as a result of Google's algorithm update. So again, just a new normal for search as a result of that. And then again, can you hear me now? Yes, no?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
I can hear you.
Cool. All right. So what I said, if I was lost for a second there, is that shopping trended upward, couponing trended down, contests and freebies trended down as well. Okay, so as far as some of the influence and factors here, it's really just people going back to some of their pre-COVID buying habits, and also restrictions that have changed year over year. So we had a bit of a record-setting season, but there was also a bit of a downturn of people going to physical stores, which again is a result of more and more people shopping online. So there were still a lot of supply chain shortages, but certain things became more available. And so, the key supply and demand impact there was represented in that shopping activity as well. And then there are also people that were seeing a lot of financial pressure, perhaps lower income folks or people that just weren't able to weather the pandemic in the same way with some of the benefits, in the States we had ramped up benefits with respect to unemployment, and some of that disappeared for folks. And the job market is in a really weird place where there's far more people, far more jobs available at the higher end, but in some cases lower availability for jobs at the lower end, and a lot of cutbacks happening in a variety of places. So as a result of that, there's been a lot of situations where consumers are just continuing to feel that financial pressure. And so people still want to use coupons, but it just doesn't seem like there's a lot as available as there may have been previously. And so as a result of that, we're seeing that, specifically at the end of the year, of course, is that tapering off of the activity, which tends to happen as a result of, the holiday shopping season ending. But in 2020, that was far more pronounced than what we saw in 2021. And so again, there's the stress shopping that happened throughout the year. Again, there's the supply chain issues that impacted buying behavior. And also what we saw in 2020 was a lot more people finding themselves ordering from brands that they, hadn't ordered from before. And so what we're seeing is, just an expansion in the types of brands they may be searching for as compared to years prior to the pandemic. And so, excuse me, the Delta variant came about around, the end of 2020. And so, there's a lot of more people ramping up towards those lockdowns and restrictions that we saw in the top of 2021. So that uncertainty may have also impacted shopping then as well. And so like I was saying, the trend for shopping is generally the same year over year. It's just that towards the end of 2020, there's more of a dramatic drop off than what we saw in 2021. So with the Omicron variant, we didn't see the same dramatic drop. It's kind of like people were used to being in the pandemic, and so the attitude shifted for 2021. So as far as the activity around the keyword freebies, again, we see this ramp up towards the beginning of the fall, leading into the holiday season, the holiday shopping season, but still a bit of a drop off. And it's also maybe a function of there being less coupons and freebies available, again, as a result of inflation and supply chain issues. So companies that are looking to get more of a foothold may consider rolling out, more coupons, more freebies to get more people to consider their brands going into 2022. So food and drink, we saw a bit of a drop here, towards the middle of the spring, and that maintained where it was. And a lot of that is largely a function of the restrictions that were put in place, with a lot of different restaurants. So there was a lot of confusion, concern with respect to, like, do I have to wear a mask to go to this place? Am I allowed in? Can I go with a vaccine and stuff like that? That just yielded a lot of changes in how people were considering whether or not they're going to go to restaurants and things like that. And so if we look at the subcategories here, we're seeing that desserts and baking is trending upwards, cocktails and beer trending downward, cuisine specific terms trending downward, food and drink in general going upwards, Italian cuisine, wine, health and low-fat cooking, and food allergies. All of this kind of sends a bit of a mixed signal because, some of these things indicate that, like, okay, maybe I'm not going to go out as much and maybe I'm going to cook more. But then it kind of indicates, like, maybe I'm not going to cook more because I have this fatigue from, being the in-house baker for the last year or so. And so if we look into this in more depth, you see that American cuisine was trending up, coffee and tea were trending downward. I don't believe in coffee, so I'm with that. Barbecues and grilling downward, vegan going upward, French cuisine trending upward, and so on and so forth. So a lot of cuisine that more and more people are interested in, but things like Mexican cuisine going downward, which I don't understand because give me tacos and burritos any day. But the large increase from these search impressions around baking and desserts may be a function of what was happening on TikTok. So a lot of people may be aware that TikTok surpassed Google as the most visited site last year. And so there's just a lot of things that are being made famous, like cloud bread, ice cream cakes, and baked oats that may have yielded impacts on this trend. And so we're seeing drops in search impressions around cocktails and beer, which I don't necessarily know makes sense with respect to the bars opening back up, but maybe it's a function of people not having to make old fashions in their house anymore. They can just go to a bar and drink it rather. So on this trend of food and drink, it was down in 2020, but if we look year over year, we see that it's actually down further as compared to 2020. So what we're seeing here is just that the food and drink industry saw or went through a lot of stress. And then, in 2021, we just weren't seeing the same level of impressions. And again, I think it's a function of that cooking fatigue, and also just, people wanting more of those fun desserts. So we look at the trends here. We're seeing broccoli recipes dropped towards the middle of the year and then recovered a bit towards the end of the year. Chinese delivery generally trended downward. And then if we look at Italian restaurant, that generally trended upward. It looks like a lot of people are taking their mom to Italian restaurants for Mother's Day. And then cookie recipes trending downward a bit and then recovering towards the end of the year. And that may be a function of people cooking cookies for Santa Claus around the holiday. And then pizza near me, it went up around the spring, saw a bit of a fever pitch around July, which may just be a function of, people ordering pizza for the holiday season, and then things going back to where they were in the spring during the summer, and then dropping a bit around November, which makes sense because of Thanksgiving. And yeah, that's what we got. So I'm gonna hand it over to you to talk about the data that's available in AWR.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, that's it. This is actually a screenshot of our keyword difficulty report. This is pretty much what it looks like. And why are we talking about it in the context of ever-evolving search demand, right? Search volume trends. Well, when you do a difficulty update for a keyword, you can actually see what's been happening for the last 2 months, whether the searches are going up or going down, and if they're going up, if they're trending upwards, it means that in the following months, you might have a better chance to have a higher search demand for that particular keyword. And if you're visible for it, that'll mean more traffic to your website, right? And that brings us to the, no, let's go back just a second. Okay, that brings us to the difficulty scores that you see right there, that very, very colorful scheme table that you can see. So what we've done is we compute a global difficulty score, which is then broken down into domain difficulty, URL difficulty, and content score. What is the purpose of this? This will tell you how much work you have to do in order to get to the top 10s for that specific keyword. Because if, let's say, the searches are going up for a keyword and you're, let's say, between 11 and 20, we're already talking about a low-hanging fruit situation. If you get to the top page, if you get to the top 10s, for that particular keyword, then you're going to get more traffic. And this is exactly what the difficulty update tells you. If you break down the global difficulty to domain difficulty, URL difficulty, and content score, it'll tell you what Google prefers when it ranks websites in the top 10s for a specific keyword. If the domain difficulty is higher, then it means that the top 10 ranking websites have a great authority. If the URL difficulty is a bit higher, it means that Google prefers landing pages with a good authority. And when you got a better content score, it means that the content for the top 10 pages, the top 10 results, is better adapted to the reason why the query was actually made. So identifying this will tell you how you want to approach work, in order to rank on the top page. And there's a secondary report after this, which is SERP difficulty, which pretty much has a breakdown for all of the top 10 results within the SERP, not only generally for the keyword. Now let's go to the keyword ranking report. Okay, there's a screenshot from the keyword ranking report where you already see keyword ranking positions, and you see 4 search volume types. So we have the monthly search volume, that's the first column. And afterwards, there's local searches. If you're tracking on a custom location search engine in AWR, you're going to get both positions from the location defined in the search engine and also the search volume that is specific to that location only. Very useful if you're optimizing a website that is only relevant to a specific location, not across the country. Okay, and then you get the quarterly search volume where you can see highlighted in green and in orange the trends for the last 3 months and the 3 months before, right? That'll attract the attention towards the seasonality of that keyword, whether it's going up or down. And then you have, of course, the global searches, which basically add the search volume trends, the search volume values that you can see across all databases. Now, very important here is the pixel position. When you're talking about top 10 ranking positions, the pixel position basically scans, I don't think that's the right word, tells you how far away from the top of the SERP your website is in terms of pixels, because as Google is adding more SERP features, it's basically blending the different types of results, universal results, in the top half of the page, of the first page. Then the organic results that are right below those are actually pushed below the fold even further. And they're not necessarily that easy to see. So you might be ranking on the third or fourth position, but if you got many of those SERP features right above them, people are less likely to see them, to see your results. So this is why when it comes to positions from 1 to 10, you also get the pixel position to tell you not only the position you're on, but also the visibility that you enjoy for that particular keyword. And this is very important because that decides how much of that traffic goes to your website based on the positions where the URL will actually appear in search. Let's go over to the next slide, and that is from the website visibility report. Now, those two slides that we presented before, those present keyword level data. Now, with websites visibility, this is the name of the report, you get aggregated stats for your entire set of keywords, or for instance, if you're tracking, if you've grouped your keywords within your project, you can actually narrow it down by a specific, let's say, content funnel, right? And you can see aggregated stats only for that group of keywords. Now, there are many visibility metrics that you see over there. So you have something like visibility percent, and you also have estimated visits, and you have visibility distribution. Now, why do we use multiple visibility metrics? They have different philosophies behind them, and they use different methods to be calculated. Visibility percent is just involving keyword ranking position performance, right? So the more you have keywords in the top 30s, right, the more visibility percent you're going to enjoy. And that says that you have a very good ranking performance. But then we go to estimated visits. Now, the estimated visits show you the estimated traffic that may be going to your website based on the search volume of a particular keyword and the click share that is specific to that position that it was found ranking on, right? So the more keywords you have ranking higher, the more estimated visits you're going to get based on the search volume of those keywords and the positions they're on. Okay, now you also have visibility distribution lower underneath the chart that you can see here. If you remember the pixel position we talked about earlier on in the keyword ranking, let's say in the keyword ranking report, pixel position is visibility distribution here. That the visibility distribution gives you how visible your website is from the top of the SERP per keyword group or for your entire set of keywords that you're tracking. Now, why are they multiple visibility metrics? Why do we use many of them? Because if you correlate them, you can identify specific cases. So let's imagine the visibility percent is keeping steady and the visibility distribution is going lower. It's actually decreasing, or the estimated visits, for instance, are also decreasing. Well, if those two metrics, the estimated visits and the visibility distribution, are correlated, but they're accompanied by a visibility percent which stays steady or goes up, it means that Google blends more results in the top page, basically, and that pushes things below the fold, getting you less visibility and less traffic, obviously. There might also be the case where you have an increasing visibility percent and the visibility distribution isn't that bad either. That's increasing as well, but the estimated visits are going down, which means that in that case, you've got a problem with the search volumes. The search demand for the set of keywords that you were tracking might also be going down. And you gotta take a look there. Now, if you take a look at the chart, there there are some Google algorithms, algo changes logged there. I think they're pretty hard to see right now, but the chart will log them so that you can actually confirm both when the Google algorithm was released and also if that impacted your search visibility, your visibility performance. If you had an upward spike or if you were hit by the update and that actually went down. And also you can add your own notes, like when you made modifications to the tracking campaign or you did some SEO difference there. Okay, so last thing about the visibility websites report, you can also do this. You can see the same data for up to 50 competitors that are tracking AWR, and you're going to see exactly the same trends. So yeah, this is how we help you try to see both the ranking visibility and visibility, which takes the search volumes into account that we talked about earlier, and that's the estimated visits. And that's, I think, enough for me here.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really love that y'all have relative difficulty scores. I've always thought that, the keyword difficulty scores that come from other tools aren't that valuable because they're like, it'll be like, oh, the keyword difficulty is 90, but it's like, y'all already ranked number 5. It's not a 90 for me. So this is actually really helpful to have it in context.
Yeah. We try to break it down to see the specifics, right? Because it's easy to say just a global difficulty score, and yeah, it's hard to get higher on that keyword. But once you have things broken down, you can see where to start the work from, basically, and it'll put things into perspective on the insights you need.
Cool. All right, just wrapping it up. So, the data sources, of course, come from the tool that you guys built. And then also there's the blog post that I wrote last year that I would recommend folks read just to further contextualize the things that we discuss. I would also encourage that y'all check in on Garrett's SEO Weekly, which is like, a weekly show that we do giving all the news about SEO. It's funny. It's amazing. So check it out. We've also got a guide to content strategy that you can get for free if you just go to this landing page. And that's all I got. Thank you. And do we have any questions?
Guys, that was so good. It's so interesting. Like just holistically looking at everything that happened over the past 2 years, and it's like the data. It's like we're not back there yet, but you see, it's almost a lot of it makes sense. Like when you see the macroeconomics laid on top of the way the search behavior acts and kind of what you take for granted, right? It's like the seasonality of things is always going to show the fluctuations, but. This was so good. I thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I don't think that we have any questions, but, if you do want to reach out and touch base with the team at Advanced Web Ranking, like I mentioned at the beginning of this, they have an email that you can reach them, help@advancedwebranking.com. So if you want to try them out, try out the software, if you're already a customer, you're thinking about upgrading, Bogdan will hook you up. But this was great. Thank you guys for joining us today. We will send over the replay of this as well as the deck so you can see all the great statistics and dive into it. There's nothing else. Everybody have a great rest of your Wednesday. And thank you again for joining us. And we will see you on the flip side. Thanks, guys.